The first sound I hear each morning is the whip. It splits the dawn before the rooster ever calls, a crack that makes the air itself flinch. I've lived so long beneath that sound, it has become the rhythm of my blood. Still, every time it strikes, a part of me dies and another part hardens. The mud is cold under my bare feet as I walk to the fields. Mist clings to the ground, gray and heavy, hiding the faces around me until the sun begins to rise. I grip my hoe and drive it into the soil. The earth groans like a tired beast, and I move with it, one stroke, one breath, one prayer. They call me the mother now. My name, Mara, isn't spoken much. Names don't belong to people like us. But when I hear that title whispered across the rows, it reminds me that there's one thing the master hasn't taken. My daughter, Elara. She works a few rows away, her laughter thin and bright like a bird no one has managed to cage. I pretend not to watch her, but my eyes find her anyway. She moves with the kind of grace that doesn't belong in this place, as if her soul remembers somewhere gentler. The manor sits on the hill beyond the fields, pale stone shining in the distance. Even from here I can feel its eyes on us, is like a living thing, feeding on our sweat and silence. When I was young, I thought if I worked hard enough, I'd stop fearing it. I know better now. Fear never fades here. It just learns to hide. Around mid-morning, the overseer rides past. His horse's hooves splash mud onto our legs. He doesn't look at me, not directly, but his gaze drifts toward Elara and lingers too long. I feel the burn of it even from where I stand. My stomach tightens. I lower my head, keep digging, but my hands tremble on the handle. Old Isaac shuffles beside me. His back is bent from years of sun and chain, and his mouth never healed right after they cut out half his tongue for preaching hope. Still, he finds ways to speak. He touches my arm lightly, points toward the manor, then traces a line in the air, the shape of a woman's hair, a child's face. He doesn't need words. I know what he means. The master's been looking at the girl, he mouths. My throat closes. The sound of the field fades until I can only hear the rush of my own blood. I whisper a prayer without words. By noon, the clouds gather. The air feels thick, heavy with a coming storm. When the first drops fall, the overseer yells for us to keep working. We always do. The rain hides the tears I can't hold back. It soaks through my dress, chills me to the bone, but I'm grateful. It washes the fear from my face before anyone can see. When the whistle finally blows, Elara runs to me. She's barefoot, hair matted from rain, eyes full of a brightness that shouldn't survive here. "Mama," she says, breathless, "I heard them talking. Master Alaric's coming back tonight." That name freezes everything inside me. Alaric, the man who bought us, who broke families like twigs and smiled while he did it. My hands clench until my nails dig into my palms. "Don't you go near that house," I whisper, wiping the water from her face. "Promise me, Elara." "I promise," she says, and I want to believe her. Night comes wrapped in thunder. Inside our small shack, the lantern trembles with every gust of wind. The air smells of smoke from the quarter's fires and wet wood. Elara sleeps beside me, her hand curled in mine. I listen to the rain, counting the heartbeats between lightning and thunder, pretending each strike is miles away. But my heart won't settle. I stare at the ceiling, at the leaking seams that drip cold water onto the floor. My wrists ache from the day's work, from old wounds that never healed right. I trace them with my thumb, scars shaped like rings, reminders of every time I knelt and begged for mercy that never came. A horse neighs outside, then another. I sit up, my pulse pounding. Boots splash through the mud. The door creaks open, and a gust of rain whirls in with two silhouettes. "Master Alaric's back," one of them says. "He wants the young one brought to the manor." The words hit me harder than any whip. I step forward before I know what I'm doing. "No," I say. My voice is raw, cracking like the lightning outside. The guard laughs. "You don't get to say no, woman." "She's sick," I lie. "Fever's bad. Tell him I'll come instead." They glance at each other, amused, and leave without answering. Their boots fade into the rain. I turn back to Elara. She's half awake, confusion swimming in her eyes. I kneel beside her, brush the wet hair from her forehead, kiss her skin that still smells of youth and rain. "Sleep," I whisper. It's just thunder. She nods and drifts back to dreams. I stay there, kneeling beside her cot, watching the door until my knees go numb. My breath fogs in the chill. I can see the manor through the cracks in the boards, its windows glowing faintly on the hill. Lightning flashes, turning the sky white for an instant, and I swear the house looks alive, waiting. I press my palm over my heart, feel the wild beat beneath. I whisper to myself, to God, to the dark that listens better than heaven ever has. If they come for her, they'll have to take me first. The wind moans through the cracks and thunder rolls again. I close my eyes, lean my head against the wall, and wait for the storm to decide which one of us it will claim. Morning crawled in slow and gray, the kind of light that didn't bring warmth, only the memory of it. My body ached from another sleepless night, but I rose before the bell. The air smelled of damp soil and smoke. Someone must have burned green wood again to keep the insects away. Elia was still curled beneath the thin blanket, her face soft in sleep, her small chest rising and falling like a quiet rhythm I could live inside forever. For a few seconds, I let myself just watch her, the curve of her lips, the way one braid had come loose and rested against her cheek. She was all I had left of goodness. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "Stay close to me today, little one." When the bell rang, its sound tore through the quarters, scattering peace like startled birds. The others moved in silence, some limping, some coughing, all too tired to curse the morning. We stepped into the wet earth, the mud sucking at our feet as though the ground itself didn't want to let us go. The fields looked different under a sky swollen with clouds. The sugarcane shivered in the wind, their sharp leaves whispering secrets we could almost hear if we listened too hard. Isaac passed by me, eyes low, his face a map of pain carved by time. He didn't need to speak. His silence said enough. He'd heard what I had heard. By mid-morning, the overseer rode out again, his whip coiled on his saddle. He looked restless, uneasy. Something about the night before must have reached even his thick skull. He barked at a few men, then turned toward the manor as if waiting for a sign. None came. All day I waited for the sound of hooves, the call of the guards, anything that would tell me Alaric had remembered his order. But the field stayed eerily quiet. The silence was almost worse than the noise would have been. When the sun slipped behind clouds, Elara worked beside me. I could tell she sensed my fear, though I tried to hide it behind half smiles and soft hums of old songs my mother used to sing. "Mama," she said quietly, "do you think the storm scared him off?" I wanted to believe it. I wanted to tell her yes. But lies are heavy things to carry, and I'd already carried enough of them for one lifetime. "Storms don't scare men like him," I said, "but maybe they keep angels busy." She didn't answer, just looked up at the sky, her young face reflected in the dull silver of the clouds. I wondered if angels even came this far south anymore. The bell for evening rest came too soon. My muscles screamed, but I didn't want to stop. I needed motion, something to keep my thoughts from settling. The other slaves gathered near the water barrels, drinking quietly. The smell of wet cane filled the air. Somewhere beyond the trees, a dog barked once and fell silent. Then came the whispers. They moved like smoke, soft, spreading, touching every ear before fading. I caught bits of them as they passed. The master's back for good now. He ain't alone this time. They say he brought a new overseer from the coast. Fear thickened the air. No one dared speak louder than the wind. A few of the younger men looked toward the hills, toward the place where the manor's white roof barely showed through the fog. Even from here, that house seemed to pulse like a wound that wouldn't close. I bent near the barrel to wash my hands, pretending not to listen, but every word found me. One woman muttered, "He'll pick someone again tonight. Always does when he's been away." Her voice trembled. Elara froze beside me. She understood more than she should have. I took her hand quickly and whispered, "Don't listen. Keep your head low." "But Mama, don't." My tone came sharper than I meant, and her eyes filled with hurt. I softened, pulled her close. "It's just talk, baby. That's all." Still, I could feel her small hand shaking in mine. When dusk fell, the air turned orange and strange. The sun bled into the clouds, and everything the light touched looked bruised. The overseer called it a half day, said the master wanted the field cleared early. We were free to return to the quarters, but nobody felt free. I lingered behind the others, watching the sky. I could smell the salt of the nearby river on the wind, the way it carried the taste of escape I'd never known. Elara ran ahead, chasing a firefly that blinked like a spark from another world. Her laughter rose above the silence, brief and beautiful, before dying as the light flickered out in her palm. That sound, it was both joy and warning. Back in the quarters, the air was thicker. The women cooked what little cornmeal they had left, and the smoke from the fires hung heavy around us. Old songs hummed low in the dark, the kind that sound like prayers hiding behind melody. I sat by the doorway, mending a tear in Elia's dress while she combed her hair with the small wooden comb Isaac had carved for her last harvest. She hummed to herself, unaware that my eyes weren't on the fabric, but on the hill beyond the trees. Lanterns flickered near the manor, little stars of cruelty in the distance. Each light that moved made my chest tighten. "Mama," she said softly, "if we ever get away from here, what would you do first?" I looked at her and smiled because it was the only thing that kept me from crying. "I'd wash my hands in clean water that didn't smell like sweat," I said, "and I'd let you sleep until the sun was high." She grinned, wide and innocent. "And we'd eat fruit off trees, right? The kind you said used to grow near the river." "Every day," I whispered, "and you wouldn't have to hide your smile." She laughed, and that sound, fragile and bright, cut through the gloom. For a moment the world felt human again. Then the horn sounded from the manor. 3 short notes, sharp, cold, final. Every head in the quarters lifted. Conversations died mid-sentence. The children froze. The dogs started barking again. I stood slowly, heart hammering. I'd heard that sound before. It meant only one thing. The master was calling for someone. Elara looked at me, confusion spreading across her face. "Mama," my lips felt numb. "Go inside," I whispered. Outside, the overseer's lanterns moved closer down the hill. Shadows of men carrying rifles flickered in the glow. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My palms went cold. The storm wasn't over. It had just learned to walk on 2 legs. I pulled Elara close, my voice low and steady, though my body trembled. "Whatever happens, stay behind me. Don't speak. Don't run. Just hold on." She nodded, her small fingers gripping my arm. And as the footsteps drew near, the whispers from dusk still clung to the air, turning into one truth that would soon break everything. The master never forgets what he wants. The night carried a weight I could feel, pressing against my ribs. The air itself seemed to know something was coming. I'd just finished scrubbing the wooden pails by the well when I heard the sound, hooves, hard and fast, cutting through the wind. Lantern lights swung across the yard, throwing sharp streaks through the mist. Everyone froze. Even the crickets went quiet. I pulled my daughter closer, her small hand trembling inside mine. "Stay behind me," I whispered. She didn't ask why. She never did. The world had already taught her that answers were dangerous things. The horses stopped at the edge of the quarters, and the overseer's shadow stretched long over the dirt. 2 men dismounted, their boots sinking into the mud, the smell of leather and sweat filling the air. One of them carried a parchment rolled tight like a weapon. "Orders from the house!" he barked. He didn't need to say whose orders. They all came from the same mouth, the same power that owned our days and measured out our breaths. The paper crackled as he read. Each word felt like a blow. They were summoning my daughter. No reason given, none needed. My knees went weak. I stepped forward, shaking my head, trying to find my voice. "She's just a child," I said, barely more than a breath. The man's gaze slid over me like a blade. "Not your place," he said. "The master calls. You know what happens when folk disobey." The other slaves kept their eyes down. Some whispered prayers, some simply turned away. I saw pity flicker in one pair of eyes. Old Miriam, her mouth moving soundlessly. I wanted to scream, to make the night itself rise against them, but all I managed was a whisper. "Please, let me go instead." They laughed, a dry, hollow sound that didn't reach their eyes. "Wasn't you he asked for?" And then one of them took a step toward my daughter. I moved faster than I ever had in my life, my arms wrapped around her, pulling her against me. "Run," I hissed, pushing her toward the back of the quarters. She hesitated, tears glinting in her eyes, and that hesitation cost us everything. The man caught her by the wrist. Her scream sliced through the dark, tearing something inside me open forever. I clawed at him, nails scraping skin, but another hand struck the side of my face, and the world spun. The ground came up hard and cold. I tasted blood. By the time I rose to my knees, they were already dragging her toward the horses, her cries shrinking against the wind. "Mama!" she called. Once, twice, then nothing but hooves again, fading toward the manor on the hill. The quarters were silent except for the rasp of my breathing. No one dared move. Even the fire in the pit seemed smaller, its flames shivering like it wanted to hide. I stumbled to my feet, every part of me shaking. I tried to follow, but old Miriam caught my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "They'll kill you before you reach the gate." "I'd rather die than let her face him," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It was lower, harder, filled with something rawer than fear. She let me go then, because she understood. The world had taken everything else from me. It would not have my child. I ran. The fields blurred past, the stalks cutting my arms as I pushed through. The manor loomed ahead, lights burning in its high windows like watchful eyes. I could smell the smoke from the hearth, hear the faint laughter drifting through the walls. Each step felt heavier than the last, but my resolve grew with the pain. At the gate, the guards tried to stop me. I dropped to my knees, not out of surrender, but to look small enough to be pitied. "Please," I begged, "take me instead. She's a child. She don't understand the master's ways." One of the guards sneered. The other looked away. I could see doubt flicker, but fear won over mercy. "Go back," he said, hand on his rifle. I didn't move. I pressed my forehead to the dirt and cried out louder than I meant to. My voice cracked open the night. "If there's any soul left in that house, tell him it's me he wants. Take me." From somewhere inside, a curtain shifted. A silhouette appeared against the window. For a heartbeat, I thought the world might stop. Maybe he'd see me and spare her. Maybe the sky would split and something divine would make it right. But nothing happened. The window went dark again. The guards dragged me away from the gate and threw me back toward the fields. My body hit the ground hard, but I didn't feel it. The only thing I felt was the echo of my daughter's last cry ringing in my ears. When I finally stood, the night had gone completely still. The moon was bright enough to show the path back to the quarters, but I didn't turn that way. I faced the manor instead. My hands were bleeding. I could smell iron and dirt. The world had taken its choice from me, but it hadn't taken my will. Somewhere inside that house, my daughter was crying for me, and before this night ended, she would know I was coming. The night wind cut across the fields like a blade, sharp enough to draw tears from my eyes. My feet carried me forward before my mind could catch up. Each step was a prayer, each breath a plea. By the time I reached the manor gates again, the sky had turned the color of bruises, deep purple fading into black. Lanterns flickered in the windows like restless spirits. I didn't care what waited for me inside. I only knew my child was somewhere beyond those walls, and she was afraid. The guards at the gate didn't even bother to raise their rifles this time. One of them muttered, "She's back," under his breath, almost with pity. They didn't stop me. Maybe they thought I wouldn't return alive anyway. The wooden doors of the manor groaned as I pushed them open. The air inside smelled of smoke and candle wax, the scent of a world that had never known dirt or hunger. My bare feet left streaks of mud on the polished floor. I didn't care. I called out, voice trembling but steady enough to carry, "I'm here for my daughter." A figure stepped out from the shadows at the end of the long hallway. His voice came first, smooth and cold. "You?" he said, like the word itself was something bitter he didn't want to taste. He descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the hollow space between us. His boots clicked against the marble. His eyes, when they met mine, were the kind that looked through a person rather than at them. I bowed my head, not out of respect, but because looking at him too long made my stomach turn. "She's a child," I said. "She doesn't understand your orders. Please take me instead." He stopped a few feet away, studying me the way one might study a stray animal that wandered too close. The silence stretched until it hurt. Then, at last, he smiled, a small, sharp curve of the mouth. "Take you instead?" he repeated, almost amused. And why would I trade one for the other? Because I am her mother. The words came out fierce, stronger than I felt. Her life is worth more than mine. She hasn't yet been broken by this place. You'll gain nothing by hurting her. But me. I swallowed the rest, forcing the tremor out of my voice. I'll do whatever you ask. Just let her go. The fire in the hearth crackled, sending shadows dancing up the walls. He didn't answer right away. He just turned, walking slowly toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. Do you know what you're offering? He asked finally, his tone quiet but sharp enough to make me shiver. You would give yourself up, knowing what that means. I know exactly what it means, I said, though my throat tightened around every word. I know what kind of man you are. He turned then, eyes glinting in the firelight. You think you understand me? He asked, stepping closer. No, woman, you only understand pain. And yet, he paused, tilting his head. There's something almost noble in what you're trying to do. A mother's love. Always such a dangerous thing. He waved a hand to the guard by the door. Bring the girl. Moments later, they let her in, my daughter, her face streaked with tears, her tiny hands clenched so tight they shook. She saw me and tried to run to me, but the guard held her back. Mama! She cried, the sound cutting through the air like glass. I wanted to grab her, shield. Her, take her away, but I knew this was the only way. Let her go, I said quietly. She's done nothing wrong. The master studied us both for a long moment. I could see the decision forming behind his eyes, not from compassion, but from curiosity. Maybe he wanted to see how far I'd go. Maybe he wanted to test the limits of a mother's will. He gave a small nod. Very well, he said finally. She may go. You will stay. My daughter's scream turned into a sob. The guards dragged her back toward the door, and I dropped to my knees, grabbing her hand one last time before they pulled her away. Don't look back, I whispered fiercely. Go with Miriam. Stay quiet. Stay alive. She was crying too hard to answer, but I saw the understanding in her eyes, that terrible kind of knowing that children should never have. When the door closed behind her, the silence that followed was worse than any sound. The master watched me for a moment, then poured himself a glass of wine. You've made your choice, he said almost softly. Remember that. The rest of the night stretched long and merciless. I don't remember every word he said, or every step I took through those dark corridors. I only remember the feel of my heart beating, the sound of the rain against the window, and the thought of my daughter running through the fields toward safety. That thought kept me upright, even when everything else in me wanted to break. When dawn came, the manor was quiet again. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and candle wax. I stood by the window, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't mine, staring out at the horizon. The sky was pale gray, the kind of color that doesn't promise anything. My hands were shaking, but I didn't feel shame. I felt hollow, yes, but inside that emptiness was something sharp and alive, a spark that would never die. They let me go at sunrise, as if setting a bird free after clipping its wings. I walked barefoot down the long dirt road, the world spinning softly around me. The fields looked different in the morning light, quieter, sadder. I could hear the workers stirring, the sound of chains rattling faintly across the distance, and then, from somewhere among them, a small voice cried out, "Mama!" I turned, and there she was, running toward me, her dress torn, her hair wild, but her eyes shining. I fell to my knees, and she crashed into me, wrapping her arms tight around my neck. I buried my face in her hair and whispered the only words I had left. It's over now. You're safe. But as I held her, staring past her toward the manor, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. Something had ended, yes. But something else had begun, deep inside me, rising like fire in my blood. And one day, that fire would burn everything he ever touched. I remember the door closing behind me. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it felt like the earth itself had sealed me in. Candlelight trembled along the stone walls. The flames bent in the draft as if they too were frightened. Somewhere beyond the corridor I heard laughter, thin, distant, and cruelly careless. I told myself that every echo of that laughter was another second my daughter remained alive and free. I stood in the center of the room, hands folded to stop their shaking. My mind kept slipping to the field's smell. Wet soil, crushed leaves, her laughter floating over the wind when she chased dragonflies. I clung to that memory as if it were a rope across dark water. The manor's air tasted of smoke and iron. It scraped my throat raw. A clock ticked somewhere unseen. Each tick seemed to carve a mark into my chest. I thought of how quickly a night could stretch when a soul was measuring it in heartbeats instead of hours. The candles burned low. Wax dripped in slow tears down their sides. I stood still and silent, waiting for dawn to come and prove that I had survived the bargain I had made. I began to whisper prayers I had long forgotten the words to. They rose like fragments, half hymns, half pleas. Maybe no one heard them, maybe that was better, but they kept me from falling apart. When the shadows deepened, I imagined each one was a spirit of the mothers who had come before me, standing in the dark to remind me I wasn't alone. Time blurred. At some point I sank to my knees. The cold of the stone floor traveled up through my bones until even my breath felt heavy. I pressed my palms against the ground, feeling its roughness. Remember this, I told myself. Remember the feel of it, so that when the day comes, you will know what it cost. I must have drifted in and out of sleep or something like it. Dreams came, flashes of light through trees, the sound of my daughter's voice calling my name. In one dream she was grown, standing tall and unbroken, her hair shining in the sun. She smiled and said, "You kept your promise." I woke with tears on my face, though the dream had felt almost peaceful. Near dawn, the manor fell quiet. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. I rose, legs trembling, and walked to the window. Outside, the first thread of light had touched the horizon, soft and pale. Mist coiled over the fields, silver against the dark earth. The air smelled different, cleaner, almost forgiving. I opened the window and let the cold wind strike my face. It hurt, but it was the kind of pain that meant you were still alive. Behind me, the hallway stirred. Footsteps, deliberate and slow. I didn't turn. I kept my gaze on the light crawling across the sky. It reminded me of her small hand, slipping from mine hours ago, the way her eyes had begged me not to let go. I told myself she was with Miriam now, hiding in the sugarcane rows, waiting for the morning bells. That image steadied me more than any prayer ever could. When the door creaked open, I whispered her name once under my breath. Just her name. That was enough to fill the room with. Something sacred. Whatever happened in the hours that followed, I let my mind stay anchored to that single sound. My daughter's name, rising and falling with every heartbeat. And then, at last, it was morning. They left the door open behind me when it was done, as if daring me to walk out into the world again. I did. My body felt hollow, my feet numb against the floor. The corridor looked longer than before, the paintings on the walls warped by shadow. I passed them like ghosts passing through mirrors. Outside, the air struck me, sharp, alive, filled with dew and birdsong. The sunrise was thin but honest. Every step back to the quarters was a battle between the weight of what I had given and the strange lightness of still breathing. I had thought sacrifice would feel like death. Instead, it felt like a wound that refused to close. When I reached the fence line, I saw her. My daughter sat on an overturned bucket, eyes red but wide awake. She jumped to her feet when she saw me and ran. The world narrowed to that single motion, the thud of her small feet against the dirt, the burst of her arms around my waist, the way she pressed her face into my stomach and whispered, "Mama, you came back." I held her so tightly she squeaked. The sky above us glowed brighter, the sun pushing through the last veil of clouds. The other workers watched from a distance, their faces unreadable. Some nodded, slow and solemn. Others turned away, unable to look at what had been bought with a mother's promise. I bent down to meet my daughter's gaze. "We don't speak of this night," I told her. "Not ever. You keep your eyes on the fields, on the sky, on anything but that house." She nodded, small and serious, and for the first time I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a strength that didn't belong to a child. As the day rose around us, I realized the world hadn't ended after all. It had simply changed shape. The chains felt heavier, but my heart had learned a new rhythm, one that pulsed with quiet fury and purpose. The The wind carried the scent of ashes from the manor's chimneys, and I promised myself that one day that smell would be their undoing. For now, I simply stood there, breathing the morning air, holding my daughter, and waiting for the sun to climb high enough to burn away what the night had left behind. The morning light did not bring peace. It crept across the floor of my cabin like a thief, slow and cold, revealing the wreckage of what the night had left behind. Every sound felt sharpened, the creak of the boards, the cry of a bird outside, even the whisper of the wind through the cracks in the wall. I sat by the hearth, motionless, my hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. Rebecca slept in the next room, her breathing soft but uneven, and I could not bring myself to look at her. I kept replaying everything, the footsteps, the pounding on the door, the silence that followed, when the world seemed to stop breathing. In that silence, something inside me had hardened forever. I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The woman I had been, the servant who bent her head and whispered, "Yes, ma'am, yes, sir," had died sometime during the long, sleepless hours that followed. What remained was something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. When the rooster crowed, I knew I couldn't stay inside any longer. The plantation woke with its usual rhythm, the shuffle of tired feet, the crack of the overseer's whip somewhere far off, the faint sound of someone crying softly into their apron. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing was. I stepped outside into the gray dawn. The air smelled of wet earth and ashes. A thin mist hovered above the fields like a ghost that refused to move on. As I walked toward the well to fetch water, heads turned and eyes followed. No one spoke, but I could feel the questions burning in every glance. The people knew. They always knew. Word traveled through the quarters faster than smoke. Old Mama Rose was waiting near the wash line, her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw no judgment in her eyes, only a weary kind of understanding. "Child," she said quietly, "you done stepped onto a road that don't have no turning back." I met her gaze. "I know," I whispered. She nodded slowly. "Then you walk it steady and you walk it smart." Her words stayed with me as I went about my morning chores. I moved like a shadow through the big house, silent and invisible. Miss Catherine was at the breakfast table, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, though whether from sorrow or guilt I could not tell. She barely looked at me when she ordered her tea. "Terrible business last night," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Mr. Morrison didn't come to breakfast. The master sent men to check on him." My heart thudded once, hard and cold. I kept my head bowed, hands steady as I poured her tea. "Yes, ma'am," I said softly. By noon, the rumor had become a fact. Jake Morrison was dead. They found him near his cabin, lying face down in the mud, his skin pale and his eyes glassy. Some said he'd drunk himself to death. Others whispered about poison. A few claimed they'd heard strange noises in the night, a struggle maybe, or the wind screaming through the trees. No one dared ask too many questions. The master was furious but not grieving. Morrison had been useful, not beloved. His death was an inconvenience more than a tragedy. The sheriff came and went, muttering something about accidental causes. The master ordered the matter closed, and just like that, life went on. But not for me. That evening, I sat alone outside my cabin, watching the sky bleed orange and gold over the fields. Rebecca stayed inside, her face pale and her eyes empty, like the light had been drained out of her. I had tried to comfort her, but every time I reached for her hand, she flinched. That cut deeper than anything Morrison had ever done. She didn't know the truth. Not yet. Maybe she suspected. Maybe she dreamed it in the half-sleep of her haunted mind. But I couldn't tell her. Not now. I needed her to believe in a future still worth living for. As the last light faded, I felt the earth tremble beneath my bare feet, the weight of history pressing down, the weight of every woman who had ever been forced to choose between her soul and her child. I thought of the stories whispered through the quarters, of mothers who drowned their babies to save them from slavery, of wives who set fire to cabins rather than let their husbands be taken. I used to think those stories were nightmares. Now I understood they were love stories, written in blood, but love all the same. When darkness fell, the frogs began their songs and the stars rose like 1,000 silent witnesses. I looked up at them and spoke quietly, not to God, I'd stopped expecting him to answer long ago, but to the ancestors who had carried us through worse. I did what I had to, I whispered. You understand that, don't you? The wind rustled the trees in response. Later, as I lay beside Rebecca, listening to her breathing, I thought about what came next. Morrison's death would change things, but not in ways that made life easier. Someone new would come, another overseer, another man with a whip and a cruel smile. The system didn't die just because one of its monsters did, but something had changed inside me, and that, I knew, was where true rebellion began. I wasn't the same woman who once believed survival meant submission. I had seen what power fear could give to a person and what power love could take back. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this much. I would never kneel again. It began as a sound too small to notice, a breath between words, a glance that lingered a moment too long. By the time the sun rose 2 days later, the whisper had become a current running through every corridor and cotton row of Bowmont. Jake Morrison was dead, they said, and the ground itself seemed to hum with the secret. I first heard it while hanging sheets to dry. The fabric snapped in the wind like a sail, white against the hard blue of the morning sky. 2 women by the pump were talking in half sentences, their voices dropping whenever I drew near. They didn't have to speak the words. I could see them in their eyes, fear and something else, hope, cautious and dangerous. By noon, the fields were alive with talk. Each story grew in the telling. Some said the devil had come for Morrison himself, dragged him off by his boots. Others swore a woman's shadow had been seen near his cabin just before dawn. Every tale ended the same way. A cruel man was gone, and the world felt a fraction lighter. The master ordered silence. He rode down the line that afternoon, his horse sweating, his voice cold and clipped. No more foolishness, he said. Work, not gossip. But words have a way of surviving whips and threats. When he left, the murmurs rose again, softer this time, like bees under the floorboards. I kept my head low, but inside me, the whisper became thunder. It wasn't just Morrison's death they were talking about. It was the possibility that fate could still be moved, that something other than pain could reach those who had given it so freely. It frightened me, that thought. Hope was more dangerous than despair. Despair kept you still. Hope made you act. That evening, I found myself walking toward the edge of the quarters where the pine woods began. The air smelled of sap and smoke. Mama Rose sat there, her old hands weaving a basket that looked more like a crown of thorns. She didn't look up when I approached. "So it's out," she said. "Yes." "And you?" Her eyes lifted, sharp as a blade. "What you gonna do with it now that it's out?" I shook my head. "I didn't mean for it to spread." She smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her mouth. "Child, secrets are like seeds. You drop them once, and they find their own ground." The night deepened around us, cicadas screaming in the trees. I watched the glow of the big house through the branches, a single lantern burning in the master's study. He was probably writing letters, reports, demands, perhaps a request for a new overseer. Life on a plantation had rules like clockwork. Remove one cog, another is fitted in its place. But this time the clock ticked differently. The rhythm of Bowmont had changed. You could feel it in the fields, in the kitchen, in the way people looked at one another. They were still bent under the same weight, yet something invisible had shifted. A breath had been drawn that no one knew how to release. Later, when the moon rose, Rebecca sat beside me outside our cabin. She didn't speak at first. Her eyes traced the stars the way children trace patterns in dust. When she finally turned to me, her voice was barely a whisper. "Did you ever think about running?" The question struck deep. I thought of rivers, forests, bloodhounds. I thought of mothers who never found their children again. And then I thought of freedom, not the kind written on paper, but the kind that lived quietly in the heart. "No," I said at last. "I think about standing." She frowned. "Standing?" "Here, where they can see me." Her hand found mine, small and trembling. For the first time in days, she didn't pull away. I could feel her heartbeat racing under her skin, a bird against a cage. The whisper reached the house that same night. I knew because I saw Miss Catherine's face at breakfast the next morning, pale, hollow, frightened in a way that had nothing to do with grief. Her husband had scolded her in front of the servants, accusing her of letting the place slide into chaos. The mistress, who once prided herself on refinement, now looked like she might shatter at the sound of a spoon against porcelain. By evening, another rumor bloomed. The master planned to sell 3 of the younger men to make an example. The whisper that had started as a spark was turning to fire. Fear tried to smother it, but the embers glowed stubbornly on. I stood outside the kitchen door, watching shadows stretch long across the yard. The air was heavy, thick with something that felt alive. For the first time, I realized how many of us there were, how many hands, how many backs, how many eyes that had seen and remembered. The masters were few. We were many. And though chains still clung to our wrists, something stronger had begun to bind us together, a shared silence filled with possibility. That night, I lay awake listening to the whisper moving through the quarters, 100 voices breathing the same secret, the same warning, the same prayer. It wasn't a song yet, but it would be. Sooner or later, it would find its rhythm. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. The world outside might still belong to them, but the night was ours. The storm didn't break with thunder this time. It came quietly, a gathering of clouds that turned the air heavy, the kind of stillness that makes even the birds go silent. I could feel it deep in my bones before I ever saw it in the sky. Something was coming, something that had been waiting too long to arrive. For days after the whisper spread, Bowmont didn't breathe right. The overseer's death had left a space no one wanted to fill, yet everyone feared to leave empty. The master walked the grounds himself now, his cane striking the dirt like a metronome, sharp and impatient. Every sound carried, the clink of his boots, the harsh rasp of his breath, the low murmur of men plotting in corners. He called us all to the yard at dawn. The fog hadn't yet lifted, and the dew clung to the grass like sweat. "I know what's been said," he began, his voice calm in that way men's voices get when their angers turn to something colder. "Jake Morrison's death was an accident, but I will not have poison in my house, not in body, not in word. Anyone caught spreading lies will be punished severely." He let the silence hang, waiting for someone to tremble, to flinch. I didn't. I kept my eyes on the ground and my face still. If he saw the truth in me, he gave no sign. When he dismissed us, his wife's voice followed his like a ghost. "I want this place clean again." Clean. That word stayed with me all day. Clean floors, clean plates, clean stories, as though scrubbing hard enough could erase the filth that ran through the walls of that house. By afternoon, the air was restless. A wagon arrived. Strangers from the next county, men with the Jordan look of bounty hunters. The master greeted them at the porch. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw the way he gestured toward the fields. He was hunting something. Or someone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The lamps in the big house burned late, their yellow light flickering against the windows like eyes that refused to close. I heard boots moving on the path, men talking in low voices. They were searching cabins one by one, looking for proof, looking for a culprit. I waited in the dark, holding Rebecca close. Her breath was warm against my shoulder. Every creak outside made my heart seize. But they didn't come to our door. Not that night. When dawn broke, I stepped out into a world that felt sharper than before. The whisper had turned into something else, a hum of anger moving just beneath the surface. Eyes met mine across the yard, heads nodded faintly. It wasn't spoken, but we all knew. We had seen what power looked like when it faltered, and now we were watching it unravel, thread by thread. That afternoon, I saw the master strike one of the men for not moving fast enough. The sound of it, that flat, cruel crack, filled me with something that burned hot and clear. Not fear, not sorrow. Something purer. When the man stumbled to his knees, another worker stepped forward to help him up. The master raised his cane again, but before it fell, someone else caught it mid-air. A single heartbeat of silence followed, long enough for everyone to realize what had just happened. The master's eyes went wide, the color draining from his face. He didn't say a word. He turned, walked back toward the house, and the rest of us stood frozen, unsure if we'd just witnessed defiance or doom. That night the quarters were alive with quiet movement. No one said the word rebellion. No one had to. We just kept working later than usual, patching tools, mending clothes, whispering names of those who'd stand watch. The air pulsed with a strange electricity, as if the very soil beneath Bowmont could feel what was coming. Mama Rose came to me before dawn. "You started something, child," she said softly. "I didn't mean to," I replied. Her old eyes glittered in the half-light. "That's how it always begins. Nobody ever means to set fire to a field. But once it's burning, you got two choices: run from it or walk through it." I thought of Morrison's lifeless body, of the master's pale face, of my daughter's quiet trembling in her sleep. "Then I'll walk," I said. She smiled, slow and proud. "Good. 'Cause the reckoning don't stop for nobody." The day that followed felt longer than any I'd known. The master sent word to the sheriff, but word travels both ways. By evening, the men he'd hired were gone, slipped off before dark, claiming the road was cursed. He stood on the porch as they rode away, shouting, furious, powerless. It was then I realized how much smaller he looked, not in body, but in presence. A man used to being feared, now fearing shadows he couldn't name. That night, thunder finally rolled across the sky, breaking open the long silence. Rain came down in sheets, drumming against the rooftops, flooding the yard. I stood in it barefoot, the mud cold between my toes, and felt the weight of the world lifting, piece by piece. For the first time in years, I raised my head toward the storm and didn't flinch. I woke to the smell of smoke, not the sharp sting of the hearth or the sweet burn of cedar logs, but the deep, heavy scent of something larger, something ending. The rain had stopped before dawn, but the world still glistened. Thin ribbons of mist curled through the fields, and somewhere beyond the tree line, a faint orange glow pulsed like a heartbeat. I stepped outside barefoot, my skirt heavy with damp, and followed the scent. The earth was soft beneath my feet, the sky bruised and restless. By the time I reached the edge of the quarters, I could see it clearly. The old barn at Bowmont was burning. Flames licked the timbers with greedy hands, crackling and roaring as though they had been waiting years for this chance to speak. Men shouted, buckets clanged, but the fire only climbed higher, feeding on the dry hay and the brittle bones of everything the plantation had been built on. For a moment, I thought I heard singing. Not from the quarters, from the fire itself. A low hum, the sound of something ancient and vengeful breaking free. Rebecca appeared beside me, her hand slipping into mine. Her face was pale in the glow, but her eyes were steady. "Did you do it?" she asked. "No," I said truthfully, "but maybe someone did it for me." We stood there, mother and daughter, watching the sky turn red. The master's voice carried over the field, wild, furious, as he ordered men to form a line. But no one moved fast enough for him this time. The power in his words had thinned, like a rope fraying under strain. Then came a sound that silenced even the fire, the crack of the great oak splitting near the house. Lightning must have struck it during the storm. It fell slow, majestic, and terrible, crushing the fence in a shower of sparks. When the smoke cleared, the tree lay across the path to the big house like a warning drawn by nature itself. Mama Rose joined us soon after, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked at the fire, then at me, her eyes filled with something between grief and triumph. "You smell that, child?" she murmured. "That's the scent of change. Don't come often, but when it does, it leaves nothing the same." Her words felt true. The fire wasn't just devouring wood, it was consuming memory. Every cruel order, every lash of the whip, every silent tear shed in those fields seemed to rise with the smoke. I could almost see faces in the flames, the ones we'd lost, the ones who'd never had the chance to stand as I did now. By mid-morning, the barn was gone. The house still stood, though its paint blistered and its windows reflected nothing but smoke. The master had vanished inside hours before. No one followed him. We waited. When he finally emerged, his fine coat was stained and his voice was raw. "The sheriff will come," he barked. "This will not be forgotten." But the words hung in the air like empty shells. The men around him didn't answer. They kept their eyes on the ground, their shoulders still. The fear that had bound them to his orders had burned away with the barn. He turned toward me then. For the first time, I met his gaze fully, not as a servant, not as a victim, but as a witness. I saw confusion flicker there, maybe even recognition, before he looked away. Rebecca's fingers tightened around mine. "Is it over?" she whispered. I looked toward the horizon, where the smoke thinned into light. "Not yet," I said, "but it's ending." That night Bowmont was quiet. The sky cleared and stars scattered across it like spilled salt. The air smelled of ash and wet grass. I sat outside our cabin long after Rebecca had fallen asleep, the warmth of the dying fire at my feet. In the distance, the great house stood dark. No candles burned in its windows. The silence between us, between the quarters and the house, felt different now. Not submission, not terror, just waiting. I thought about what would come next. There would be more masters, more laws, more chains of one kind or another. But I also knew that something had shifted too deeply to be undone. The fire had marked us all. As I watched the last embers fade, I realized what the whisper had truly meant. It wasn't about revenge or death. It was about witness, about refusing to let the story end in silence. I pressed my hand to the ground, feeling the warmth still pulsing beneath the soil, and whispered to the night, "You can bury a body, but you can't bury a name." The wind stirred, carrying the ashes toward the stars, and for the first time since the night that ended everything, I felt free enough to breathe. The morning came softly, as if the world feared to wake what had just fallen asleep. The air was cool and still, the smoke gone but its memory lingering like a bruise on the horizon. The ashes of Bowmont lay gray and quiet, stretched across the fields that had once echoed with cries and orders. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the place was silent in a way that didn't feel like waiting. It felt like breathing. Rebecca stirred beside me, her hair tangled, her face smudged with soot and sleep. She blinked into the pale light, confusion giving way to a strange, fragile peace. "It's morning," she whispered, as if testing whether the world would answer. "It is," I said. My voice felt different in my own mouth, lighter yet older somehow. We stepped outside together. Dew clung to the grass, glimmering like glass beads. The quarters were still, though I saw faces at every doorway, tired, wary, but awake in a way I'd never seen them before. Mama Rose sat on her porch, a basket of charred herbs beside her, humming a tune so old it might have come from the wind itself. When our eyes met, she nodded once, slow and certain, as if to say, "It's done." The big house still stood, blackened around the eaves, its white paint blistered into gray curls. No one went near it. The master's carriage was gone. They said he'd ridden out before dawn, his wife with him, leaving everything behind except what he could carry. For a long while, I stared at the road he'd taken, a narrow trail cutting through the trees. I thought about how small he must have looked as he disappeared into the mist. Then I turned away. The fields waited. Smoke had darkened the cotton rows, but life still shimmered underneath. The stalks that hadn't burned would grow again. Nature always found its way through ruin. Rebecca slipped her hand into mine. "What will happen now?" she asked. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "Maybe we work the land for ourselves this time. Maybe we move on. Maybe we just live." She looked up at me, her eyes catching the sunlight. "We can go anywhere." I smiled at that, such a simple question, and yet it broke something open inside me. "Anywhere," I said. "Everywhere." The wind rose, tugging at our clothes, carrying the smell of clean earth and distant rain. The same wind that once carried orders now carried promise. Around noon, a small group gathered near the well. No one spoke at first. We just stood there, looking out at the fields, the rows of blackened soil, the sky stretched wide above us. It wasn't freedom yet, not in the way songs dreamed it, but it was something close, a beginning, a breath. Mama Rose lifted her voice first, a sound low and trembling. Others joined her one by one until the melody filled the air. It wasn't sorrowful, not anymore. It was steady, defiant. a hymn made not of hope or grief, but of endurance. I closed my eyes and let it move through me, every note stitching together the torn places inside. When I opened them again, the world seemed different, brighter, sharper, the kind of morning that made you believe the sun could remember your name. As the song faded, people drifted back to their work, slow and deliberate. No overseer's whip marked their rhythm now, only the sound of feet in the dirt, the scrape of tools, the heartbeat of the land reclaiming itself. Rebecca and I walked to the edge of the creek that bordered the fields. The water was clear again, reflecting the sky's pale blue. I knelt, cupped a handful, and let it run through my fingers. The cold bit into my skin, waking every nerve. I felt alive in a way I hadn't for years. "Will you tell me about her?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "About the woman you were before." I looked at her for a long time, then smiled. "No," I said softly. "She's gone now. But maybe I'll tell you about the woman I'm becoming." She nodded, satisfied. Together, we watched the creek move on, quiet, unhurried, unstoppable. When the sun reached its peak, I stood and turned back toward what was left of Bowmont. The fields shimmered under the light, and for the briefest moment, I saw it all as it could be. The land without chains, the people without fear, the air without the weight of obedience. That vision settled over me like a promise, fragile but real. I took Rebecca's hand, feeling her small fingers wrap around mine. "Come on," I said. "Let's go see what the world looks like beyond these fields." We walked away slowly, the dust rising behind our steps, the song of the quarters echoing faintly in the distance. Every footfall felt like a heartbeat, every breath a declaration. The sun blazed higher, gold and fierce, chasing the last of the shadows from the ground. And though I didn't know where the road would lead, I knew one truth that would never leave me. Some nights end in silence, others end in fire. But every dawn, every single dawn, belongs to those who survive it.